Foreign Secretary David Lammy there. Now let's get the weather with Carol.
Live from Beirut, this is BBC News. The Israeli military says it's launched a limited ground operation against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Well, this is the scene live in Beirut this afternoon as Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister says the country is facing one of the most dangerous phases in its history. Hezbollah has fired missiles into central Israel this morning, hitting a highway, and air raid sirens have sounded.
I'm Lucy Hockings in London with the other news. In the US, more than 100 people have now known to have died and over 1.6 million homes are without power after Hurricane Helene tore through southeastern and midwestern states. And in Thailand, 23 people, most of them children, have been killed after a school bus crashes and then catches on fire near Bangkok.
Hello, you're live with BBC News. I'm Anna Foster here in Beirut, following, of course, the developing story for you today, the conflict in the Middle East and the escalation that we saw in the early hours of this morning here in Lebanon when Israel confirmed that its troops had crossed the border and started what they call a limited ground operation into southern Lebanon. Now, a senior Israeli security official has described the operation. The words they're using are limited local raids. They say that they're targeting Hezbollah strongholds that threaten Israeli border areas. They've also urged people who live there this morning, people who live in more than 20 towns in southern Lebanon, to evacuate immediately and move north. Hugo, thank you. Hugo Bashega, our Middle East correspondent, joining me here in Beirut. And response is what it's all about really now as well. We're talking about the response here in the Middle East, but also from the international community as well. We've heard calls from the US, the UK again in the last 24 hours for an immediate ceasefire, which doesn't seem like it's going to happen just now. It is a fast-moving, fast-developing story, and of course, we'll keep you right up to date with it here on BBC News.
Anna, thank you so much. Anna Foster there, who we will be with throughout the day here on BBC News. I just want to take you live now to Bangkok to another story we're going to be following very closely. We'll be live there for you in a moment with our correspondent at the scene. But let me show you the pictures now of Thailand. We now know that 23 people, most of them children, have been killed in a horrific bus crash just outside of Bangkok. They were on a field trip in northern Thailand. 19 children, 3 teachers, we understand, have been killed. We had some live pictures. They've just disappeared, but we will be live there with our correspondent shortly. So do stay with us here on BBC News. Do stay with us. Plenty more to come. As I mentioned, we will be live in Thailand and we will continue our coverage of the situation in the Middle East. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Good to have you with us here on BBC News. Let's continue our special coverage of the situation in the Middle East, what is happening on the border now between Israel and Lebanon, with the IDF saying it's engaged in fighting with Hezbollah. Its troops have crossed the border into southern Lebanon overnight. But let's find out exactly what is happening and take you live to Israel. We can speak to the spokesperson for Israel Defense Forces, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner. Good to have you with us. Could you please clarify exactly what is happening on the border, because we've had a statement from Hezbollah that says this is entirely incorrect, the fact that your forces have crossed the border and there have been no direct clashes. So what is happening right now? But let's just show you the latest pictures, the live pictures we have from Beirut as we continue to bring you special coverage from the Middle East. Israeli troops saying they have invaded Lebanon. The IDF saying this is a limited, localized and targeted ground operation against Hezbollah. More on all of these stories coming up on BBC News. Do stay with us. This is BBC News, the headlines. Backed by strikes from the air, Israel Defense Forces say they've launched a limited ground operation against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah fires missiles into central Israel. A highway has been hit. Air raid sirens have sounded across Tel Aviv. In the US, President Biden prepares to visit areas devastated by Hurricane Helene. More than 100 people are dead, but hundreds more are still missing. And the BBC investigates Sudan's hunger crisis as the civil war causes famine in parts of the country. I'm Lucy Hockings. Thanks for being with us. Let's continue our special coverage of the situation in the Middle East, with Israel's military saying it's engaged in intense fighting with Hezbollah after its troops crossed the border into southern Lebanon overnight. The IDF launching what they called a limited, localized and targeted ground operation against Hezbollah. This map shows the border with southern Lebanon marked in red. Well, meanwhile, Hezbollah said it was targeting Israeli troops with artillery fire at the border town of Metula. The IDF has declared Metula a closed military area, meaning all entry is prohibited. Well, let's find out we know about what is happening on the ground. And with me is our security correspondent, Frank Gardner. Frank, as you talk to us, we're going to bring up a map that shows a little bit more about exactly where this is happening. But when the IDF say they are launching a limited, localised and targeted ground operation, what does that exactly mean?
For this invading force.
The IDF are now on their territory.
Indeed.
Thanks, Frank, so much. As always, good to see you. The former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte has become the 14th Secretary General of NATO. Jens Stoltenberg, who served as the head of the military alliance for more than a decade, will be replaced at a meeting at the organisation's headquarters in Brussels. So let's take you live to Brussels now. We can speak to our defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale, who is there. Before we talk about Mark Rutte and his plans, Jonathan, what are people saying there about what is happening in the Middle East at the moment, and is there any kind of consensus? Skylar, thank you so much for joining us. Skylar Henry joining us from North Carolina there. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. One of the worst famines in decades could soon take hold of Sudan following a year and a half of brutal civil war there. Up to 150,000 people are believed to have died. Millions more are displaced in what some say is the worst humanitarian crisis facing the world today. Barbara Pladasha sent us this report from Omdurman. You can have a front row seat as these 100 couples get married. They form civil partnerships there today as well. Some people are renewing their vows because we are streaming things live for you on the BBC News website. Not much happening at the moment, but if you also go to the live page, you can see people talking to our correspondents who are there about how they met and what they felt about the day. And crucially, you can also see these wonderful pics too of the bride and the groom in that top shot, but there's some civil partnerships taking place as well. Lots of gorgeous photos for you to scroll through and take a look, as there is 100 weddings being celebrated today. One of the major stories now to bring you out of the US is that tens of thousands of East and Gulf Coast port workers are striking. It's the first time they've done this in nearly 50 years. It comes after the International Longshoremen's Association and the US Maritime Alliance were unable to reach an agreement on the terms of their contract. These strikes will halt trade in a wide range of goods and disrupt the country's economy just as we enter the final weeks before the presidential election. We'll have more on the story throughout the day. Do stay with us on BBC News. Live from London, this is BBC News. Backed by strikes from the air, Israel Defense Forces say they've launched a limited ground operation against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. This is seen live right now in Beirut. The Prime Minister says his country is facing one of the most dangerous moments in its history. Hezbollah fires missiles into central Israel. A highway has been hit. Air raid sirens have sounded across Tel Aviv. President Biden prepares to visit areas devastated by Hurricane Helene. More than 100 people are dead and hundreds more are missing after the storm tore through southeastern states. And in Thailand, a devastating story. 23 people, most of them children, have been killed after a school bus crashes and then catches on fire near Bangkok. Hello, I'm Lucy Hockings. Welcome to BBC News Now. Let's bring you the latest from the Middle East. Israel's military says its troops have crossed the border into southern Lebanon. A senior Israeli security official describing the operation as limited local raids that are targeting Hezbollah strongholds that threaten Israeli border areas. Let me just show you the BBC News Live page, which is up and running at the moment, being updated every few minutes or so with the very latest from the region and our team of correspondents who are there. Frank Gardner's latest assessment. Our security correspondent is there, Sally Nabil, one of our correspondents who has been to the north and right across the country, in fact, and Orla Guerin, who is in Tyre as well, have just in the past few minutes or so posted the very latest from there. So do log on and take a look. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Welcome back. We'll be back in the Middle East in a moment, but let's update you on a story out of Thailand where 23 school children and some of their teachers as well have died after the bus they were travelling in caught fire just outside of Bangkok. The blaze began after a tyre on the bus burst and it caused it to hit a road barrier. It's not yet clear though what started the fire. Some children and teachers who were on a school trip did manage to escape. Our correspondent Jonathan Head is there at the scene. But we're listening across this press conference. We will bring you the very latest news lines as soon as we get them and continuing coverage from our correspondents across the region. Do stay with us. This is BBC News, the headlines. Backed by strikes from the air, Israel Defense Forces say they've launched a limited ground operation against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah fires missiles into central Israel. A highway has been hit and air raid sirens have sounded across Tel Aviv. President Biden prepares to visit areas devastated by Hurricane Helene. More than 100 people are dead and hundreds more are missing after the storm tore through southeastern states. And in the US, the two vice presidential hopefuls, Democratic nominee Tim Walz and his Republican rival J.D. Vance, prepare to go head-to-head in a live TV debate. Hello, I'm Lucy Hockings. Good to have you with us on BBC News Now. Israeli troops say they've invaded Lebanon in what their military calls a limited, localised and targeted ground operation against Hezbollah. People in around 25 villages in southern Lebanon have been told to evacuate, and the Prime Minister has said his country is facing one of its most dangerous phases. Our Middle East correspondent Yolande Nell has more. Frank Gardner, let's just show you the live pictures that we're getting right now from Beirut, which the IDF says its strikes are continuing there, and you can see there is still quite a bit of smoke in the air. Officials in Lebanon saying a building in a Palestinian refugee camp near Sidon has also been hit today. We're keeping across all these developments for you in the Middle East. Shortly as well, we will take you to the US, looking ahead to the first and only vice presidential debate, and we'll have more coming up as well on the ongoing conflict in Sudan. Do stay with us here on BBC News. One of the worst famines in decades could soon take hold in Sudan following a year and a half of brutal civil war there. Up to 150,000 people are believed to have died, millions more displaced, and what some say is the worst humanitarian crisis facing the world today. Barbara Pletasha sent us this report from Omdurman. With around 5 weeks to go until Election Day, the US vice presidential candidates will face each other later today in their only scheduled debate of this election. Tim Walz, the Minnesota governor, will be representing the Democrats and Kamala Harris. J.D. Vance, the Ohio senator, will be making the case for the Republicans and Donald Trump. So let's take you to our North America correspondent, Neda Tawfiq, who is, like many people I'm sure, Neda, going to be watching tonight. I was in the US for the debate between Harris and Trump. So much anticipation around that. Clips then ran for days on all of the networks. How high would you say the interest is in this vice presidential debate? Great to see you, Neda. We're counting down. Thanks so much. You can watch the CBS News Vice Presidential Debate simulcast here on BBC News. We're going to have a full build-up from 1 a.m. British Summer Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So do join us. It'll be a debate to remember, I'm sure. And coming up here on BBC News, the very latest from the Middle East. There's a live page up and running too on the BBC News website. Do log on and take a look. See you again in a few minutes.
Live from Beirut, this is BBC News. Israel launches a ground invasion of southern Lebanon as its troops cross the border. Well, this is the scene live in Beirut now as Lebanon's Prime Minister says this country is facing one of the most dangerous moments in its history. And Hezbollah has fired more missiles into central Israel, hitting a highway, and you've heard the sound of sirens across the city of Tel Aviv.
I'm Lucy Hockings in London. And other news. President Biden prepares to visit areas devastated by Hurricane Helene. More than 100 people are dead, but hundreds more are missing after the storm tore through southeastern states. And in Thailand, at least 23 people, most of them children, have been killed after a school bus crashed and then caught fire near Bangkok.
Welcome to Beirut. I'm Anna Foster. You're live with BBC News and we're keeping you up to date with this developing and fast-moving story here in the Middle East as early this morning, Israel launched a ground invasion into southern Lebanon as its troops cross the border. Now, the IDF have been speaking just in the last hour or so a bit more about that. I'm going to tell you what they had to say in just a second. They described it early this morning as a limited operation. They said it would be localized and targeted on specific areas of Hezbollah infrastructure across the border here in southern Lebanon, in areas that threaten Israeli targets in the north of that country. Now, in response, we've seen Hezbollah firing missiles again today. That's Ola Gurin, our senior international correspondent, with the latest from Thai. Well, this is a fast-moving and fast-developing story. We're keeping you up to date with it here on BBC News, but you can also follow our live page on the BBC News website as well, with all of the latest developments, context and analysis from me and our other correspondents in the region as well, to keep you right across everything that is happening here in the Middle East today, around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News.
Let's continue our coverage of what is happening in Israel and Lebanon at the moment. We can show you some live pictures coming to us at the moment of Beirut, of the Lebanese capital, where we know that strikes have been hitting the capital today, but also officials in Lebanon have said a building in a Palestinian refugee camp near Sudan also hit. As Anna was saying, in the past hour or so, we've learnt from the IDF that the Israeli military, have been operating inside Lebanon for months. Special forces have destroyed Hezbollah tunnels and seized weapons as well. And Weeks to go until Election Day. The US vice presidential candidates will face each other later today in their only scheduled debate of this election. It's Tim Walz, the Minnesota governor, who is representing the Democrats, and Kamala Harris. J.D. Vance, the Ohio senator, will be making the case for the Republicans and Donald Trump. BBC Verify's fact-checking team will be looking out for some key claims, as Merlin Thomas now explains.
Vice presidential candidates J.D. Vance and Tim Walz will go head-to-head on Tuesday night.
To stay with us here on BBC News. Coming up, it's World Business Report with Ritika in New York, and Michelle is with some of the striking dock workers as well. See you as well in a few minutes' time.
Live from New York at the opening bell, this is Business Today. US stocks open little changed to kick off the fourth quarter after a surprisingly strong September performance. Pickets at the ports. This is the scene live in Newark as US dock workers stage their biggest walkout in nearly 50 years over pay and automation, threatening billions of dollars of economic damage. Plus, trading blows. 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs come into force in Canada. We hear from the country's trade minister on the reasons behind the move. Welcome to Business Today, live from New York. I'm Ritika Gupta. Where US stocks open little change, but let's start here in the US with our top story, where ports all across the East and Gulf Coast have virtually ground to a halt. It means goods ranging from cars to machinery and fresh fruit and vegetables are going to find a lot tougher to get into or out of the world's biggest economy. And in other news, the Republic of Ireland's Finance Minister, Jack Chambers, has been delivering the country's budget for 2025. He said Ireland plans to invest 14 billion euros, that's $15.5 billion, that Apple has been ordered to pay Ireland in back taxes into housing, energy, water and transport infrastructure. Mr. Chambers said the budget presented a unique opportunity to plan, transform and deliver for the future. And more than 900 Samsung workers have been arrested by police in the southern Indian state of Tamil Nadu. They've been accused of organising a street protest without permission as they demand higher wages and union recognition. And that's all we have time for. Thanks for watching. Do stay with us here on BBC News.
Hello from the BBC Sports Centre, I'm Hugh Ferris. Mikel Arteta is known for coming through the Barcelona academy, but it is at PSG where he played his first senior football. And his Arsenal side's match against the French champions is the highlight as the second round of the new Champions League gets underway later. Much more on our website, of course, but that's all we sport for now.
In the last few minutes, we have had some breaking news. Reports from two separate news agencies that a senior White House official says the US has indications that Iran is preparing to imminently launch a ballistic missile to attack against Israel, which the official says would carry severe consequences for Iran. And to remind you, tensions between Israel and Iran have really ratcheted up in recent weeks. Israel stepping up its efforts, of course, against Hezbollah. Today we have heard news of that ground invasion into southern Lebanon, and as Iran, of course, backs the Hezbollah militant group. So we are now getting this news coming to us from several sources that Iran is preparing to imminently launch a ballistic missile to attack against Israel. To remind you, we have had this happen before, back in April when we saw a drone and missile attack being launched from Iran towards Israel. So we will keep across that story and bring you all the very latest. But the White House telling two separate sources that they believe Iran is preparing to launch an imminent ballistic missile attack against Israel. More on the Middle East as well throughout the day, but to matters here in the UK, where it is day 3 of the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham. And 2 of the candidates for leader, Kimi Badenoch and Tom Tugendhat, were questioned in front of Tory members yesterday, and later it'll be James Cleverly's turn. But now Robert Jenrick is just finishing his time in the hot seat. Let's take you to our political correspondent Damien Grammaticus, who is in Birmingham covering the conference for us. What did he have to say, Damien? Damien, thanks so much. Damien Grammaticus joining us there from Birmingham. And Damien will have all the latest from the conference throughout the day here on BBC News, so do stay with us for that. Plenty more to come. Matthew is with us shortly. See you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Hello. Flooding continues to cause concern across parts of England.